world, this is Rick Sajorda. A lot of you know me as DJ Flip, and I'm here to share with you some techniques and basics of the art of scratching. A lot of you obviously are familiar with the art, and some of you probably have never seen it up close, but I'm sure you've all seen it in videos and you've seen it one time or another. So I'm here to show you, break down the different techniques on different scratches that maybe you can enhance your performance later in the future as you progress on. Now, the biggest factor in achieving the kind of scratching that you see all the time is the type of mixer that you use. Now, virtually you can scratch with any mixer because all you're doing, scratching is what you're doing with the record hand. But to achieve all the cuts, like you want a mixer that has a fader curve adjustment. Now, the reason why I say it's important to have a fader curve adjustment is it sets the sharpness of your crossfader on how you're basically transitioning from one side to the other. So what I mean is, if you'll see in most mixer usually has like a dial or a switch to show you what kind of fader curve adjustment options are there, usually from soft to hard. In this case, this mixer has either slow or fast. Now, slow would be the equivalent of, if you're transitioning the fader from one side to the other, it would come in soft. See how soft it is, and then it gradually gets louder as you push it to the middle. Now, if you cut to the sharpest setting, it'll come at its full volume the second it leaves the side that it's designated on. Same with the up and down faders. You can gradually soften it, or you can cut it sharp. Most turntablists or DJs would either mark the record. It's like if you're looking at this like a clock, this is 12, 3, 6, and 9. And they would usually put like a certain mark depending on where the needle is, or depending on where they want to know where that mark is. In this case, I don't have a mark, so I'm using the interface on Scratch Live. As you can see, is a clock marker. So you can see this mark is at 12 o'clock. So this is where I want to keep my sample at all times. I know it starts here and it ends around 3 o'clock. So basically, I want to stay within the 12 to 3 o'clock area. Alright, let's start with the most basic of all scratches. We like to say this is the mother of all scratches. This is called the baby scratch. This scratch was invented by Grand Wizard Theodore, where basically he just took the record and moved it back and forth to a beat, like this. Now all it is just moving it back and forth to the beat, so you want to make sure, depending on what the tempo of the beat is, you want to be able to do it in the same rhythm. Alright, the next scratch we're going to get into is what we call a forward scratch. Forward scratch is basically, as it says, you're only hearing the forward motion of the sound. So, if I have a sample here, I'm only hearing the record going forward, and as I'm pulling back, I am cutting the sound off at the same time. So, all you're hearing is... Alright, the next scratch we're going to get into is similar to the forward scratch, but it's adding a little bit more rhythm to to the fader and the scratching movement. This is what we call the stab. You take your thumb and use it as a spring. And it would spring the fader back. So every time you would push the fader open with any of your fingers that you decide to use, you could use one finger, you could use two fingers, and as long as your thumb springs it back, it's like turning a switch on and off. So basically with the stab is, again, using the forward motion and cutting off the reverse. Now when you reverse, if you're doing a reverse scratch, it would be the opposite, so you'd only hear the reverse. But in this case, we're using the forward. Now to stab, basically, again, you would cut the sound off every time you bring the record back, but you're doing this in rhythmic form. Alright, the next scratch we're going to get into is called the transform scratch. This scratch was named after the Transformers. The way the transform scratch works is the fader starts out off, on the off position. So basically all I'm doing with the record hand is moving it back and forth, and I would just cut in and out in rhythm. And depending on how you move the record, the faster you move it, the higher the pitch sounds. The slower you move it, the lower the pitch is. Now the next scratch we're going to go over is called the flare scratch. Flare scratch was invented by a guy named DJ Flare, and basically what the flare scratch is the opposite of the transform. So now if the transform scratch sounds like this, the flare scratch would sound like this. Basically what it is again, the fader would start open, and the record would be moving back and forth, just like on the transform, but you would cut the sound in half. So depending on how many clicks you do, because there are 1-click flare scratches, there's 2-click flares, 3-click flares. So basically what it is if you're moving the record one time and click one time, you would hear two sounds. Now if it's two times, you'd hear three sounds moving forwards, three sounds moving backwards. So no matter depending on how many clicks you make with the fader, increases one extra sound on the record. Now let's get on to one of the most now popular scratches that are commonly used now is called the crab. Crab was invented by the world famous DJ Qbert, based out in San Francisco, California, and basically what he did was he was able to make the scratch sound a lot more rapid, like almost like a ripple type of sound, just by grazing his fingers on the side of the fader. The way he grazed his fingers was it's almost like a snapping motion, like if you're snapping 3 fingers. So basically what he's doing is, again, using the thumb as a spring. The record hand, again, you would just be moving the record back and forth. And again, the faster you move it, the higher the pitch. The slower you move it, the lower the pitch. So, and working the fader at the same time, it creates that ripple sound. All right, this next technique is called the chirp scratch. Basically, the chirp was invented by DJ Jazzy Jeff from Philly, and what it is the record moving back and forth, and the fader cutting in and out. So you're only hearing half of the record movement each way. So half of the sound going forward and half going back. So only you would hear the sound. Basically, with a chirp, you would hear the sound going, half the sound going forward, and cutting half of it with the sound going back. And you could do different interval speeds, slow and fast. And the scratch now we're going to get into is called tearing. Tear scratches are basically like the baby scratches, but adding rhythmic stops to it. So if you're, again, tear scratch does not necessarily involve the fader, although there are more advanced scratches using tears with the fader. But in this case, the basic form of doing tears is, if a baby scratch is just rubbing back and forth, tears would have stops in between. Now this one's a little bit more of a simplistic scratch. It's basically called fades. And what is a fade? You just fade out the volume. So now, putting all these scratches together, you can create your own kind of composition. So there you have it. Those are some of the basic forms of scratching. Now, in order to do any more advanced scratching, those are actually the scratches you need to learn before you move on to something more advanced. Because if you notice the way people scratch today, is if you go to any kind of DJ battle or showcase or whatever, you see some really amazing things that people are doing with scratching these days. So try these out first, master them, and practice, practice, practice. That's always the key thing. That's how you get better. So until next time, this is DJ Flip signing out. Remember, practice and enjoy. Now, practice.